We started making gastric juices, but we have not even consumed food yet, right? This is still based on the site, purely by stimulus that is, non-contact stimulus. So then, of course, ideally, one would be able to eat this food, right? That's hopefully you get to do that. So then, you get to eat that food, you chew it up, you swallow it, and the next phase is going to begin upon the bolus of food reaching the stomach. So, even before the food arrives, we've made gastric juice, we've released gastrin. In a second, I'm going to explain what these things are there for, but I think you can get the idea. We know what starts to happen in our stomach when we start smelling or anticipating food, right? It starts to churn, it starts to make noises, there's like extra, feels like there's juices swirling around in there. That's all part of the cephalic phase. Here. So the next phase is called the gastric phase. Phase 2. The gastric phase is stimulated when food actually enters the stomach. So I'm going to use some different colors here. Okay, so how is the entry of food into stomach detected? There's three different ways that this is done. Close. Not just the sphincter, but something called distension. Distension means, it's like another way of saying expansion. Okay? So distension means when food reaches the stomach will get bigger, right? It's going to open, it's going to get a little bit stretched out because there's food inside. So what's going to detect the distension? Jensen, you just mentioned it. Before that, what happens when the stomach expands? It's stretching. So what is the stretch? Receptors. Stretch receptors. Stretch receptors, which are found all along the stomach. Okay, they're going to detect, expansion is taking place, and they're going to signal. Okay, their signal is going to be for the gastric pit again. Okay, so stretch receptors signal to the gastric pit cells. And they also signal the walls of the muscle for muscular contraction. Okay? So this is essentially, you have your stomach. Okay? And when the food arrives here, this stomach is going to stretch out this way, which is going to trigger a nerve response that really just kind of comes back. Right? So it's a stretch receptor on the stomach, which signals back to the stomach.
Basically, this is
Involuntary? Yeah, it is.
It doesn't go back to the spinal cord.
It should. Yes, should.
So
I'm just skipping that part. Yeah. So it should, because it still involves the medulla, right? So yes, over here, this would go up to medulla. There's no nerve that just goes whoop, like that. So yes, it would go up to the medulla because it has to do the arc, right? Sensory.
So the dude has to somehow think about eating.
They don't have to, no, because this part is not, just because it goes to medulla doesn't mean you have to think about it.
So it's basically still involved.
It's still involuntary. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what is this going? Let's do the second one first, and then we'll add that. So one is distension. The other one is the change in the pH, the environment inside the stomach. So we're going to call this elevated pH.
Isn't it becoming more acidic?
No, increases pH.
Think about it. No, it's a good question.
Your food gets neutralized, diluted in your food. How does it increase your food?
So if we start at the beginning, before the food arrives, what would we say is the environment?
Neutral. 2 or 3.
Why would it be neutral?
Because there's no acid yet. Oh,
It's like a 2 or 3.
Before we even started eating, we were making gastric juice.
well, before you even see the food.
I mean, there's still something in there, right?
From Mr. Osler's standpoint, you'll never get something that's pH.
So we are saying that from the cephalic phase, the inside of the stomach is acidic. Then when food arrives, it's
Diluted.
sort of not neutralizing completely, but it's going to make it a little bit less acidic, right? Elevated pH means less acidic. Okay? What kind of receptor is going to detect this? It's up there if you look. What type of detector?
It's called a pH probe.
Chemo. Exactly. Chemoreceptor. Chemoreceptor means we're detecting some kind of chemical change.
It's called chemo.
Chemoreceptor.
That's
I
camel.
thought always we pronounce it as chemo.
That's weird.
I wrote that in the test.
Chemotaxis.
That's weird.
Why?
I don't know. Oh no. I mean, chemo sounds weird. Is what I'm saying.
Sounds like a camel.
All right. Then, so the chemoreceptor. No. Chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptor also does the same thing. Signals through the medulla, and what's the result going to be? Just the same thing. The same thing. So those will signal back and also signal the gastric pit, which means more juice. Also signal more muscle contractions, which means more mixing.
What's the point?
Okay, the last one is a detection of partially digested peptides. So meaning all these proteins are going to come in, and then slowly the pepsin starts to break it down. This gets detected, okay, as well. By also saying chemoreceptors, right? Chemoreceptors. And this one will specifically trigger or target the G cells. And what does the G cell do? The G cell produces
G hormone.
G hormone called, starts with G, yes, gastrin. And you'll be very surprised to know, what does gastrin do?
Make you full.
No, even easier than that.
Makes you hungry.
No, even easier.
Makes the stomach big.
Even easier. Look here. What does gastrin end up doing?
Eat.
Make you
Trying to make this simple. What did this do? What did this do?
Same thing.
Same thing. Gastrin does the same thing.
Tell me, what's the point?
It's just many ways of getting more juice, getting more. Right? So gastric pit cells means more gastric juice, more contractions means more mixing.
Could there be like disease where like this whole process doesn't happen?
Maybe. You could have problems with producing any one of these things. Could have nerve issues that upset your digestion. Awesome.
What if you said like you should not run when you digest? What if you run right within the stomach?
When what?
Like what if you go running when the bolus is in the stomach?
It won't feel very good because it'll be like churning around. Not to mention your body is redirecting energy, right? So when you're eating, more blood flow goes towards the stomach, which means less blood flow for other parts, which is the reason why they tell you like don't go swimming immediately after eating, because your blood supply, energy supply, oxygen supply is diverted, right? It's being redirected to a different place. Okay. So here you have a very small summary. So we get the stretch receptors, chemoreceptors, signal through the medulla, back to not just the exocrine cells, but the endocrine cells. So you have the gastric pit endocrine cells, you have the, gastric pit exocrine cells, G cells in the endocrine world. They are releasing the hormone, or for that, releasing HCl and carcinogen. Okay, so all this kind of is used to make more gastric juice, make more mixing, keep the pH low, and so on. Is that okay? Okay, let's go on to the last phase. The last phase is the intestinal phase. What do you think is going to start the intestinal phase? Based on the name. Sure. What would cause that to happen? Like in simpler terms, we're saying that
Very digestive.
yes, therefore the food is
Flowing,
Diffusing.
not even
What?
confusing.
traveling.
Yeah, just moving.
Confusing.
Moving
I don't know.
moving where?
That usually works.
Into
Small intestine.
the small intestine, exactly. So in the intestinal phase, it's kind of the stomach has done its digestion portion, it's done its mixing and churning, and now the arrival of food into the small intestine, we call it chyme at this point, right? Entry of chyme into small intestine is going to be the trigger.
Oh, it's chyme. I thought it's chime.
Chyme, chyme, I think chyme is.
What's like?
It's what happens to what the food is called after the stomach. So that's food, then you chew it, then it's a bolus, then it goes to the stomach, then it's chyme, then it's poop, I guess.
Feces.
Feces at the end.
I only know the last.
So you don't know food.
No. Food is before.
Feud?
Food is
Feud?
Food is before. Food.
Quote, Chang Heng Wei, 2020. Food is before poop.
Yeah, keep
If anyone ever watches this video, food is before poop. And now we need the more you know.
Dun, 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 dun.
Sorry.
Food is before poop, guys. My God. Wow, my life has changed.
They didn't know this in the 1800s.
You're telling me the food comes before. Okay. How do we know that we've entered the intestinal phase?
This is quality, okay?
Aside from that, we can kind of mirror the gastric phase. So if here it's distension, since we're more focused on the stomach, when food leaves the stomach, what happens to the distension?
What's extension?
Extension.
This part. What happens to this?
Extend.
That's his extension.
Shrinks.
It shrinks a little, right? So the distension is lost, it's reduced. So we can say less distension. Okay? Less distension. Now I'm gonna use so if arrows are showing like stimulates, then a line with a bar means that it inhibits, right? So this means it stops signaling stretch receptors. So stretch receptors no longer stimulated, which means we no longer stimulate gastric pit and reduce contractions. We don't mention it, but you could also, since we're focused on the stomach, we could mention sort of there's a see, like here it mentions the low pH or arrival of lipids in the small intestine, or even here it shows things that are happening in the small intestine, like presence of lipids, decreased pH. The only one I'm going to mention is distension of, and what is the distension that we're interested in? What gets distended? When food leaves the stomach, which part of the body gets distended?
Duodenum.
Yeah, exactly. Of duodenum, that's great. You could say small intestine if you want. Okay, distension of duodenum is going to basically just do all of these same things. Right? I'm going to use red. So this will join up. This will do exactly the same.
Yeah. Stress. I know you can skip it. That's what. I don't know.
Option G.
Well, our guys is learning G.
We're just learning how cities work.
Like the plate?
No.
We just had that last time.
It's how
Like,
how
What
Shanghai
plate?
functions basically.
Something like plate.
What?
Right? Tectonic plate.
yeah,
We learned that.
we had that last time.
Is it fun?
Some of them are.
My sister chose G. What's called Warrior?
It's easy.
Really?
Yeah.
EC7?
Yes.
Yeah, 7?
There's such a thing as an easy.
I only choose EC7 choices.
Yeah, it's
Chinese BHLs.
Oh. Okay, let's keep going. So again, if you are looking for the super details, I'm not trying to like shy you away from this, but these are really good explanations. Even if you ignore the words, these pictures, okay? I didn't want to make like a separate slide for everyone, but if you look closely at these pictures, it says exactly what we did, but with nice kind of arrows. So it shows like what gets signaled, where does it signal back to, especially the gastric phase, which we just did. So if you want to say, all right, distension of the stomach, elevated pH, what does it do? It signals stretch receptors, it signals chemoreceptors. That's going to go, it doesn't show it going to medulla, but it'll go to medulla, come back, and signal sort of like almost like a sinoatrial node in the stomach, like same idea, so like an area of nerves. It's called the submucosal and mesenteric plexus.
Let's not know that.
You don't need to know that. let's not know that. This is not a democracy. It's like, guys, we're just not gonna know that, okay? I just don't. You guys with me? You guys are with me?
Like this.
Let's not know that.
He wants us to know that. We're not gonna know that. Who's with me?
Monarchy.
Okay, so then that signal goes to the walls of the stomach. So you can see here it says mixing waves, right? This churning, mixing. It also signals the gastric pit cells, mucus cells, chief cells, parietal cells, G cells. And then G cells, it shows going back around, not into the stomach, but right, because it has to go through the bloodstream. So it's traveling through the bloodstream, eventually coming back around mucous cell, chief cell, parietal cell. Right? And therefore triggering more juice, more contraction. And eventually, when everything leaves, we get the low distension, right? The less distension of the stomach, and you can see these all get shut down. So mixing waves are stopped. They're calling it peristalsis. The chief cells are stopped. Parietal cells stopped.
Peristalsis also happens in stomach.
It's trying to say like the mixing of the stomach is like peristalsis.
Like.
It is wave-like.
Circular and longitudinal.
Not the same. Not the same.
Let's not do that.
No, because it's not pushing it forward, right? It's just mixing within.
No.
It's like a, like
It's
a laundry machine.
it's
Yes, like a laundry machine, exactly. Yeah.
So
Hand washing.
Wow.
so what's the fluid inside?
Probably like hand washing machine.
It's the gastric juice, right? Gastric juice.
That's it.
That's it. So it's hydrochloric acid,
But-
pepsin. Yeah.
But when like the bottom like opens, all of this like go to the small intestine.
Yeah. Slowly. Yeah.
So it's like a toilet. And then
Yes. So the stomach has like a sphincter, right, which will open up and allow some to go out. Not everything all at once.
The acid,
And the acid too. So
All
what
of
takes
it?
care of the acid?
the bile.
Bile, right. So
Oh.
soon bile will come from over here, from the liver and the whatever, which is there. It will
So
put
it is
bile
like a
in.
toilet.
And bicarbonate, bile and bicarbonate. Also is, so when the small intestine here detects the decreased pH, so that acid stuff is coming in, it will. You can see there's an enzyme here called hormone called secretin. So secretin goes back to slow down HCl, slow down pepsin production, so that again trying to like not make so much acid.
so there are times where your stomach is just empty.
14 million. That's like 2.
Yes. Let's say that, but it's probably not completely empty. There's still some stuff in there. There's still some mucus lining, a little bit of fluid, but not as much as when you're preparing and eating. Preparing to eat and then eating. Okay. Let's do a couple of things. Some details. Detail number 1. In the gastric pit, remind me, what does the chief cell make?
Chief cell?
Remember, it doesn't match up with the letters. Chief cell makes pepsinogen. Okay. What's the enzyme called that we find in the stomach? Pepsin.
Oh my god, you have to skip the page.
What's the problem?
No
The
problem.
cell makes pepsinogen, but the enzyme is called pepsin.
Something happens in the middle.
Something happens in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay? What has to happen?
The thrombin.
The
Oh, yeah, maybe.
the
Something.
thrombin.
Something like that. Okay, let me ask a different question. Pepsin digests what? Pepsin is enzyme to digest what? Polypeptides, peptides, or another word is proteins. Okay, proteins. So it digests certain proteins. Now, if you are a cell,
I'm a cell.
you're a cell.
You're tripping.
What are you? At least say their name right. You're Tripsin. You be Tripsin. That is a terrible dad joke. Tripsin. If you are a cell, what are you made out of?
Protein.
There's a lot of protein, right? In your structure, in your membranes, in your nucleus, in your all of these structures have proteins, making up the organelles and so on. So tell me what the problem is here.
It's protein making.
Protein making protein.
Protein making protein, but what's the protein that we're making?
That breaks down
Protein that breaks up all
Okay.
So then our body is trying to go to
It's destroying
It's self.
a committing suicide.
So if you're a cell that makes pepsin, you're building an enzyme that breaks down the stuff you're made out of.
I don't feel very good.
Right? So how do we prevent this? I just told you before we started this strand of thought.
Pepsinogen.
Making pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is what form of the enzyme?
Before pepsin.
In a soluble form.
Yes,
Wait,
true. Soluble.
Excuse?
It's also what? It's
Inactive.
inactive.
Oh.
It's inactive and soluble. So, what do you think? Think of the environment that we're talking about. We're talking about the stomach. What's going to activate pepsinogen?
Oh, the acid?
Ah, the acid. Wow. Okay. So,
We are forming.
up until now, what if we said in like IG level, we said the stomach has acid because what?
To neutralize bacteria.
To
Neutralize bacteria.
neutralize. You're under arrest, sir.
Come with me.
You won't get away with this. Yeah, kill would be better. Kill pathogens would be better.
What do you mean? Then?
Oh, there. Okay.
And bacteria is not acidic. Neutralize bacteria. So, to kill bacteria, yes, that's what we would say. That is still true. It doesn't mean that we were lying. Okay, that's still important to destroy pathogens.
She's not lying this time.
Okay. However, the other reason, we in IG we teach it sort of in a reverse way. When we talk about enzymes, we say different enzymes work in different conditions, right? Different pH optimum, temperature optimum, whatever, this kind of thing. Yeah. And then the example we always use is pepsin. We say, well, pepsin has to have optimum pH of 2 or 3. That's why it works in the stomach. Now here's
Here's the catch.
Here's the catch. If you think about it, it's not that way, is it? It's that,
They lied to us again.
no, it's that the environment being acidic is able to activate the pepsin, right? So one of the reasons for the stomach being acidic is in order for pepsin to exist properly, not the other way around, right? It's not like, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anyway. Pepsin is the active form of the enzyme. We don't want to release pepsin through a cell because they will start to break down the cell itself.
Wait, so pepsinogen is pepsin.
Pepsinogen is pepsin. Yes, that's correct. So pepsinogen is released, it hits the acid, and then boom.
It's
turns
not
it-
like something like,
Wait.
I don't know, like a red blood cell clotting factor that something deposed thrombin. Some,
No, there's not something ahead of this.
so it's just bam.
Bam. Yes,
The IP
bam.
exchange.
And bam. So why do we need the acidic environment? One is to kill bacteria from food, but two is to activate pepsinogen so that it can break down proteins. Okay? So those two reasons for acid in the stomach, really critical. A separate type of protein enzyme, right? Trypsin, which is found released by whom?
The pumpkin.
Yup. Pancreas. Okay? The pancreas is releasing into where?
What?
Where- To the duodenum in the small intestine, yes.
The duct.
That's not an acidic environment, right? But same idea, you can't just produce trypsin in the cell, it will break down the cell itself. So it releases as trypsinogen.
What is going on?
Trypsinogen is inactive. And in the small intestine, there are cells that produce an enzyme that's going to help do the conversion. So it's trypsinogen,
Internal king.
enterokinase will convert. So these are like stuck along the wall of the small intestine. As the trypsinogen passes by, boom, change, substrate, enzyme substrate complex, right? Reaction, boom, products. The product is trypsin.
Whoa. That's trippy.
Trypsy? Trypsy?
That is the pun of the day.
You be trypsin. You must be trypsin.
What a name.
You must be trypsin.
that occurs in like,
Man, you must be
No.
tripsing.
like The Office. Gypsy. And Pepsi. And Gypsy.
That TV show looks like it's still in life.
It is. There's no stabilization. It's just
The
like,
Office is one of the best TV shows of all time.
But then it's like they film on the phone. They're just like wobbly.
But
like-
that's what it's supposed to be. It's a mockumentary. That's the whole style of it. It's meant to be like
They come
they
in full
follow them.
stabilizers.
They're following them around through the because they do
The irony.
interviews, right,
Oh, yeah.
with the characters. That's the whole premise. It was one of the first shows to do that.
No, stop. No.
No, 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 please, God, no.
That's what she said.
Wait, have you really watched this?
My kids.
Have you watched a lot of it though? Like I've watched this many times.
Miss English is.
Yeah,
missing
it's
lots.
actually
Okay, yeah. That's true, yeah.
That's what she. And then some memes just came from. That's what she said. And then start laughing. Oh, Michael. Michael.
Michael. I could watch that all day. Okay, ready. Next thing. So that's one of the types or cells of the gastric pit. Let's look at another one. This is our parietal cell. Parietal cell, sorry, I erased it. Parietal cell produces hydrochloric acid, right? HCl. So how does this happen?
Why is it like villi stuff?
It is.
It's
Wait.
not really villi. I think those are more like cilia, but
Oh yes.
it's like
Similar.
because this is yeah. So what we're looking at is the way that HCl is produced. It's produced sort of in a two-step process. One is the pumping of protons. So H plus ions
Chemistry. I
are
just had the test.
pumped out. Okay, I'm going to switch for a second. Here on the edge, you have this membrane protein that's going to pump hydrogen ions that way into the stomach.
Oh my god, no.
Okay.
I hate pulsary.
So it pumps H plus into there. There's a potassium that comes the other way. That's not important, but it's going to use energy. So it's actively transporting, right, H plus out. Then these chloride ions, they follow because of the charge difference. So because you're putting a lot of pluses in, the negative chlorides follow. That's how you get HCl, the hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Okay. Notice on the back end you have these receptors that are signaling, right? There's gastrin. Gastrin receptor, gastrin signals, boom, we make more HCl. Acetylcholine we've seen in the synapse, right? This is a neurotransmitter that can do
Just
the
had
same
my
thing.
test.
Really?
Yeah. So because remember we just said nerve signals go to the medulla, come back, right? The synaptic cleft.
Yeah, I always thought like, what if when you're sleeping, right? Someone just shoved food in you. You don't think, you don't see, you don't
You
smell.
can't,
the
first,
food.
you can't even swallow that thing.
Let's just say.
I mean, you
it's possible.
see it in your dreams. Yes.
So,
But it takes time for like the esophagus to like peristalsis the thing down, right?
True. Yeah. So in this sense, obviously this nerve is way too big, but
What is that?
this is the synapse,
oh god.
It's a mushroom.
right? So this is showing acetylcholine. This is the neurotransmitter. So the signal that we just said, the nerve that goes up to the medulla and comes back, the last step is the release of acetylcholine, which triggers the stomach cell wall, which then produces HCl. Right? So we're linking now nerves with digestion.
Is there like, is this related to HL? The muscle contraction?
Yes. Yes, a little bit. Yeah, actually, exactly that. Because this is a muscle, right? So the muscle contraction part, not this cell specifically, but the muscular cells would also be going to the medulla, coming back, and then signal the muscle cells. Calcium release, blah, 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 blah. Right? See, it's all connected.
Why chem?
All connected.
Is there anything that science is not related to chem?
No.
No.
Even physics is related to
How about ESS?
No, of course not. Everything, the whole, it's all based on chem. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the thing. We have this acidic environment. It's great. It does what we need it to do. But some people may have an issue where, oh, sorry, we forgot to mention that mucus, the mucus is there to protect the lining, right? We said that yesterday or the other day. But some people, the mucus breaks down, okay, for whatever reason. Maybe they have an enzyme that shouldn't be there, or it wears down because they have maybe have too acidic of a diet, or whatever. For whatever reason, this can happen.
Coca-Cola.
So the mucus breaks down, right, which means that the acid is now able to contact the actual stomach lining, and that causes burns, potentially causes like wounds, right, like sores, which are called ulcers. Okay, so the damage, ulcer, U-L-C-E-R-S. The damage from acid burning the stomach lining is called an ulcer.
Oh, is this the same thing if you vomit your esophagus?
In a similar idea, yeah, because you're a lot of acid coming up through those tissues.
So then so you spell the whole you're digesting.
You're kind of, well, no, it's more like burning.
Oh.
The esophagus.
It's on fire.
Acid burn, not on fire. Acid burn.
Ethanol.
Okay, so
It's burn.
so the
And you see a hole.
how do we help someone who has ulcers to not suffer? And this would be very painful. Imagine inside your stomach you have like little wounds, and acid is like getting into that, like think of it like a cut, right? And
Okay.
acid is like entering those cuts. It can be very, very painful. What could you do to help someone?
Drink an alkali.
What else?
Hold on.
Okay, hold on. But if you did that, what else are you compromising?
What? No.
Oh.
It's not like the alkali
There's
is
no
no
more
bleach or
pepsin.
something.
Yeah, so pepsin becomes inactivated, right?
And eat pepsin.
So you just like take this and then fix it by
One-
taking this
one
and then
pill
take
and
this. And
bleach.
then, yeah. Instead of like over compounding,
Eat like toothpaste.
what they're gonna do is you're gonna take a drug that's going to help your body to produce less hydrochloric acid.
But it's still gonna hurt.
Okay? How do you produce less hydrochloric acid? Look at the mechanism that we just mentioned, right? H plus ion gets pumped out, chloride ions go after. What can we do?
Salty
Don't pump out.
Don't pump out. Exactly. Don't pump out the H plus ions. You're going to use a drug. This is the name of the drug. Okay? You need to. This is the application. It's called PPI, proton pump inhibitor.
Nice drug.
Okay? Proton pump inhibitor basically just blocks the proton pump. Right? So now if you can't pump H plus, then Cl minus doesn't go with it. You have no H or less HCl in the sum.
Doesn't the CO form inside the cell?
I think it'll sort itself out. It'll diffuse
Yeah.
some other place to get rid of it.
That's
Okay?
PYY.
Now, here's the issue. Where else, and this might only be William who can answer this question, but proton pumps.
Oh no, here we go again.
Escape.
Proton pumps. Where else are there proton pumps?
I feel like I don't even know.
Sounds like a physics thing.
Sounds like he's either relating it to because William was in chem. Or
No.
Oh,
William was
elbow?
in HL.
HL. Proton pumps. Where do you find them? Where do you find them?
Are you giving me a very big clue?
Yes.
What?
What is this?
I'll have to electron transport game.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the nerves?
Bro.
Bro.
What is this?
Where have you seen protons being pumped from one place to the next
Physics.
because of an electron that's losing energy? Pew, pew,
Oh my
pew.
god.
Oh my god. What is it called?
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty gross.
William,
What is it called?
Think, William.
I know the answer. I want you guys to know the answer.
No, they
No,
don't.
don't.
No, can we not know? They would like to not know, thank you. But you need to know.
Oh.
What is it?
It's like the one in the phospholipid. Mitochondria.
In the mitochondria, what is it called? It's staring at you.
Yeah. Electron transport game.
Electron transport game?
Yeah.
The electron transport.
Inner membrane space.
There's one more word. Electron transport.
G.
It's not game.
Protein.
It's not game.
Just start with G.
No.
this
Starts
is second letter an A.
Starts with C.
Chain.
Chain.
Chain?
Chain.
Oh, I actually got like 20%. Chain.
Electron transport
Channel.
chain.
No, you just say chain.
Oh.
And you have to say channel.
Why is the electron transport chain important, William?
Oh my
Oh
god.
my god.
It's so important.
It is, I know.
Oh.
Why?
Damn, why am I the only HL student? Where's Shinaki?
Sleeping, probably.
I'm very like, it takes in the water. This is hydrolyzed water. So
That's photosynthesis.
and then it takes some H plus, and then electron follows, and then
Uh-huh.
the electron pew 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 pew,
Yeah.
and then loses energy across each
What is the ultimate end goal of the electron transport chain?
produce ATP.
Produce ATP in the mitochondria.
Yeah.
So what process are we describing? What is it a part of?
What's part of?
The electron transport chain is the last step of.
Oh, something cycle, right?
But that's also a part of it. The whole thing is called what happens
Respiration.
in respiration. Okay, so my question is, so now you guys can come back and listen, is the electron transport chain that William's talking about is in the mitochondria and is needed for, say it again,
ATP.
ATP production
In mitochondria.
in the process of
Respiration.
respiration. So this was a long, convoluted way of saying, if you have proton pumps in the mitochondria that are needed for ATP production, right? What happens when you start taking proton pump inhibitors and
Stop making ATP.
they block all of those? You stop making ATP, which means respiration is entirely stopped.
So you die.
So you die,
Wait, what?
for real. If you block the electron transport chains of all your mitochondria, you would die, right?
So to solve this
You have to
issue,
die.
you just die.
This is
My stomach hurts.
Seriously,
You can take this. You'll die though. Okay.
No,
As
this
long
is-
as, but you promise my stomach will stop hurting? I mean, yeah.
You wouldn't feel anything anymore.
I mean, so will everything else.
Drink bleach. It's much faster and painless.
Tell me, use the logics.
Logic.
How has the PPI been designed so that it doesn't affect your mitochondrial proton pumps and only the proton pumps in the gastric pits of the stomach?
Am I supposed to know?
Are you asking all of us? or
I'm
just
asking
me?
all of you now. Use logic.
To stop like
Wait. What was the
infiltrating
question?
everything.
So it's a drug, right? It's a drug you take. People take it. Somehow it works on the stomach proton pumps, but not all the rest of the body's proton pumps. Why?
Because it's chlorine.
This is the drug we're talking about. The drug that you take. How has it been
It's neutralized with the acid afterwards.
close?
It's destroyed by acid. Oh.
No.
It's killed.
That wouldn't achieve what we wanted to achieve.
It will inhibit something.
Vitamin C.
You're very close.
It's killed afterwards by some
Inhibit
others.
pepsinate.
Pepsin?
Where do we want the drug to work?
Here.
Which is
Stomach.
where? The stomach. So therefore
It's killed.
why would you want it to be killed? First it's a drug, it can't be killed.
Oh.
It's digested.
But it has to work first.
It works, then it gets killed.
But where does it work? Why? Why there and not everywhere else?
Because there's something that pulls it in.
Oh.
You were so,
Concentration gradient.
no, you were so close just
What
there.
did he say?
You just said
I said lies.
All I said. Chlorine?
Bio.
Concentration gradient.
how would you design this drug?
Because it only it goes in there,
Yeah.
then it uses and then it dies and it doesn't go anywhere else.
Yes. Why? What would allow it to only?
Acid.
So then it's designed to
Kill.
To work in acid?
work in acid.
No.
You guys thought way too much about that one. You were so close and then you went way off track. It's designed to only be active in low pH, in acid environments. So if you take the drug and it gets into the bloodstream, starts traveling around, it's not active. It won't get into the mitochondria, it won't do anything like that, and it won't shut down your respiration.
What if you take it after you exercise and your blood is just all milky?
After you have what?
I thought when there's higher carbon dioxide content.
After you exercise. I think that's not enough. Your blood won't be pH 3. Right? It'll still be like 6.8.
388 was animals.
Carbonic acid is weak acid.
Yeah,
exactly.
Hey, we're gonna learn about carbonic acid.
What?
Oh no, why
This
is
guy.
Let's not know about
Why
that.
are you adding more to our syllabus?
Can we not know about it? This is my favorite. So there you go. PPIs are only activated by acidic conditions so that the activity is targeted. Let's stop there for today.
Yay,
It's good.
that's
Good.
great.
That's
for the
enough.
second result.
It's good.
Spider rat. There's a big spider in my yard. That's on the window.
Oh,
in the
it's-
web. It's like as big as my thumb.